My name is Bob Hart. I'm a land use consultant. Spent 20 years working for the county, making rules like this. Then I saw the light, and or some people say I came over to the dark side, became a private consultant to try and help people through all the rigmarole that gets passed on. People have heard everything's fine now, the map's gone. It's not gone. This is only the beginning, because they play sleight of hand. This started in 2019 under Governor Brown. She had an order to start looking for fire solutions. They came up with a report that's 110 pages long. That's some of the stuff behind what's going on right now. When the legislature started in 2021, this is what Senate Bill 762 looked like. It says, we're going to do a study with the electric companies to see what can be done for fire. That's what was proposed. So everybody go, well, it's just a study. Why worry about it? And then they did what they call the gut and stuff. That study requirement was removed and new provisions inserted. It is 24 pages of this wildfire program. And it was on fast track. This thing was introduced in February. Well, they had an informal meeting in April. They scheduled a public hearing and then canceled it, just like they did that first meeting here in Grants Pass. They held another hearing the next day. Then they recommended that they pass it. It passed out of the Senate 22-7. This was not a mandate from the people. This was partisan politics at its finest. The next day it went to the House. Again passed 49-6. The governor signed it and it was effective immediately because she declared it an emergency. With that took away some of the ability of the people to try and do a referendum so we could vote on it. That's not possible. I looked at the hearings that they had on this bill. There were 50 individuals or groups that put in testimony. 25 were organized groups like Thousand Friends, Nature Conservancy, all the green agenda people. There were only 2 people opposed to it, and all they talked about was, well, we think this is a little bit of a government overreach. They didn't talk about any of the specific issues. And you see, when they did this in 2021 during the COVID shutdown. You couldn't go into the Capitol, you couldn't show up for a hearing. All they had were Zoom meetings. So people weren't aware of what was going on. This was done behind your backs. These are the major provisions in the bill. To create a fire risk map created by ODF and the Oregon State University. Next in the bill, to talk with the power companies to come up with a plan for de-energizing, turning off power in high fire danger times. And if you're like me, where does your well get power? From Pacific. So if they turn off the power, what do you got to do to try and fight it? So we've got to be careful. You know, I understand that power lines can cause fires, but they've got to be reasonable about what they're doing. But they're doing overkill. The other things they got to do, they've got to do a plan for taking care of vegetation, looking at all of their facilities and see if they are fire hardened. Defensible space requirements is another part of the new bill. These came from International Wildland-urban Interface Code. This isn't something that we just came up with. This has been on the books for a while, but it was an international code, so they reached out and grabbed it. Like I said, this has been in the works for a long time. The other thing is the fire marshal is to adopt rules for the standards. This isn't in the bill. You can't read about what the requirements are. It just says the fire marshal is going to come up with them. Trust us. We'll take care of you. The other thing is the fire marshal, he can delegate administration to local governments. So he doesn't have to face the people. He'll make the rules and then have the counties go out and do the inspections. And speaking of inspections, it says there will be a property report at the property level. So everybody's piece of property will have an inspection to see if you have defensive space. And this isn't a one-time thing because they say vegetation grows back. So we're going to keep coming back again and again and again. And if you don't do what we tell you to do, we're going to start fining you. I know I went to the meeting with the state fire marshal. He says, oh, we're just going to do education. Read the bill. The bill says that they can start with a graduated fee schedule to force enforcement. It says there may be some grants to help do that, and that will apply to schools and hospitals, senior facilities, some low income, and limited English proficiency persons. Equity is the word that people use now, is they can pick and choose who they're going to help and who they're not. It says that the land use programs will be updated to address wildfire concerns, to include such things as defensible space, building codes, safe evacuation, and development considerations. Watch out for that term. Building codes are to be revised for new construction and additions to existing dwellings and accessory structures. So if you're going to build a new house, it will apply all these new requirements. If you go in and get a permit to fix the house that you already have, the new rules will apply. And they will have a mapping tool in the building department office, so they're going to start looking at fire codes. They're going to look at seismic loads, snow loads, wind loads. So this is not just a one and done kind of a thing. They're going to look at every building facet of your house. There's some other things that they are proposing. One is DEQ, to develop a smoke program for monitoring equipment and data of when it is unhealthy air. And they're going to create clean air shelters in public buildings. Like they have the programs now, when it gets too cold, they can allow people to come in off the street and do warming shelters. They're going to do smoke shelters for people to get in out of the smoke. They're also going to have a program to provide air filtration devices for people that do have breathing problems. And so that's another thing that they're going to have, another program. They love programs. The emergency management is to update the statewide plans to prepare and respond to wildfire emergencies. But it doesn't say what they're going to do. It just says, come up with a plan. You give people a blank paper, they're going to fill it up. ODF is to design and implement a plan to reduce wildfire risk by restoration of landscape, resiliency, and reduction of hazardous fuels. That sounds great. They're going to go out there and really thin the forest a bit. That doesn't sound like a bad deal. But they're going to come up with the Oregon Conservation Corps, kind of like a Peace Corps for fire things, where they're going to take kids from 13 to 26 and put them to work on these programs. But it's a state program. They're not going to send them into into BLM or Forest Service land. They are proposing a small forest land grant program to reduce wildfire risk on small tracts of 160 acres over on this side of the Cascades and 640 over in eastern Oregon. So there will be some small programs to try and help give you money to clean up your property, but how much is that going to cost to do the whole state? One of the things that Ralph talked about was they'd like to burn, so they're proposing a prescribed fire program to conduct burns by a qualified individual. So somebody can go in and get a license, submit a plan to state forestry, and they'll say, yeah, it looks like a good plan or not. When you read the fine print, it says if they get people's approval, they can burn across property lines. The other thing it says is if the fire gets away from them, the only recourse you have is if you can show that they were negligent. So they start a fire and burns your house down, they may not be responsible. It's up to you to have fire insurance to deal with that, but they're talking about a burn program statewide. The state forester, the state fire marshal, is supposed to establish baseline levels of what statewide fire protection is going to be. Here we are with another mandate with no details. ODF is to expand the fire detection system with cameras, staff, and monitoring centers. These are going to help take the place of some of the old watch towers out in the hills where they're using modern computers and cameras to do that. I don't think this is a bad thing. I think this is a step forward to try and do early detection of things. One of the other things is ODF is to increase their wildfire response capacity to include more people, aviation assets, administration, and support. We need firefighters and we need aircraft to get out there and fight fires. ODF shall provide that fire protection in that wildland-urban interface. The state Governor Brown is the one that will appoint the program director for the whole wildfire program, and an advisory council of 19 members to be appointed by the House leader and the Senate president. And who's doing that now? It's all one party that's appointing these people, and like Ralph explained, if you don't do it our way, you get unappointed to those commissions. On that council of 19 members, there's I think 1,000 Friends is on it. There's a judicial justice kind of a thing that is on there. I think there's one person that's supposed to represent property owners. One of the things is payment for required fire protection are fees that will be a lien against your property, like property taxes. Somebody's got to pay for all this, and the state decided it's you. Right now, this first part, what came in the appropriation in this bill was $201 million. That's the first price tag. And this is an ongoing project, and we don't even have all the details yet. So that can't go anywhere but up. And now the fun part. The devil is in the details. The map's being revised, is not being eliminated. A new map will be issued. And appeals, you know, they keep saying, well, it's okay. We're going to have an appeal process. You just come in, appeal your designation, and we'll fix it. But the burden is on you to show where they're wrong. You're guilty before you even get started. It's like the old thing, have you stopped beating your wife yet? You can't win with this kind of a system when they say the only reason that we can change the designation is if there's something that's a mistake. Criteria for the classifications, they say it's weather, climate, topography, and vegetation. And all those do work together to show how fires work. And so one of the things they look at is flame length, you know, of the vegetation that's on your property, but they do it in blocks. They haven't gone out and looked at people's property and see, do you have lawn out there? Do you have just dry grass? They haven't done any of that. They just took some computer maps and made some generalizations, and these are the things that we're going to look at. And just to try and even things out, they don't just look at your property, they look at property at 200 feet around your property and then lump you together. So if you have neighbors that don't do a good job, they would lump you in with them as far as the designation of your property. And they also use blocks of vegetation within 1.5 miles to do modeling of fire projections. What's the probability of a fire going on? These are all computer programs. And when I called and asked them, what are the specific details of my piece of property? It says you got to use topography. What did you use? Because if you take a picture from 40,000 feet, you're not going to get very good resolution. They can't tell exactly what's on your piece of property. But they just make educated guesses, and you've got to go prove them wrong. The next part they have is defensible space. The final version hasn't been adopted. The drafts are from the International Wildland-urban Interface Code. And local governments can adopt stricter standards. So even though the state says, well, here's what we're going to deal with, each local jurisdiction can ask for things that are over and above. Like in Jackson County, if you're on a slope, you have to clear 150 feet away from your house. So some of those things are going to be different statewide. Inspections for each piece of property, and like I said, it's not limited to a one-time review. They will set a schedule and they'll come back again and again and again. So you have to maintain this constantly. And if you don't, they'll have a fee structure for non-compliance. Right now, those international codes, it says in the high-risk areas, you need to clear a 50-foot diameter around structures. Not just your house, but accessory structures that are in the general vicinity as well. If you're in an extreme risk area, you need to clear 100 feet around your structures. And for the vegetation management, you've got to have distance between the crowns of the trees of 10 feet, and 10 feet from the trees to your dwellings, and 10 feet from the trees to the property lines. Now, I listened to the fire marshal when he gave his presentation down in Medford. He says, well, we're going to use best practices because if you have a group of trees that kind of shade the ground, that keeps it cool and moist, and so we're not going to make you cut down all your trees. The words say different. And if he's not going to be the ones that's going to be doing the inspection and they pass it on to somebody else, you never know what they're going to do in the inspection and what they're going to administer. You're also supposed to clean up dead wood and debris. These rules are to be in place before the end of the year. So this is moving right along. They are not slowing down the rest of the program. Defensible space requirements cannot be used to approve or deny permits for land use decisions. They're very big on that, saying, if you don't meet your defensive space things, we can't stop a permit for you to replace your house or change and do an addition. But in the next section on land use, it says a local government may amend their land use regulations to include these same requirements that they just said that they're not going to apply. Watch the sleight of hand. The building codes, mandatory code provisions for wildfire shall be adopted from R327, the residential specialty codes, for new construction of dwellings and accessory buildings. And also the code provisions will apply to additions to existing dwellings and accessory structures. And these codes will apply to all lots designated high or extreme. So Jeff Golden's and Pam Marsh's property, they're not affected because they're not in the high or extreme. The code requires roofing to meet fire specifications. If you're going to replace at least half of your roof, you got to replace the whole thing. Same thing with exterior coverings. Gutters must be non-combustible and have coverings to prevent leaves and debris. So, ventilation openings shall not be installed on the underside of eaves, soffits, and cornices. It can be dangerous that the things can get up into the attic and start a fire from the embers that come about. But it says if you're going to do ventilation, which you need to do to keep all the moisture from accumulating in your attic, you can have a screen that's 1/16 to a maximum of 1/8 inch. But if you put that kind of a screen in the end and you got air blowing through for ventilation, that's going to clog up, so you're probably going to have to clean those vents at least every year. Walls must be a non-combustible material, ignition resistant, heavy timber or log wall. An approved assembly is using 5/8 inch type X sheetrock next to the studs before you do the exterior covering. Like I've got an old house built in the 40s. It's got painted wind shingles on the side. Not the safest thing, but if I'm going to replace it, I've got to put sheetrock up first, then new T111 or something else, or some kind of a gypsum panel to make it at least a 1-hour firewall. And if you do an addition, it doesn't apply to just the addition, it applies to the whole house. You've got to do the whole thing. The only exceptions that I saw in the code is for accessory structures that are 200 square feet or smaller, and, they always throw in the and, it's got to be more than 50 feet from any other structure. So if you've got a small shop, storage bin, something like that, these things would apply to it unless it's more than 50 feet from other structures. And your walkways and porches and balconies, they must be fire-resistant material as well, and the bottom has to be hardened as well to make sure that the embers don't come up from underneath. Windows must be double pane or tempered glass. And this shows you the accelerated thing that they're on. They've already had the first hearing on this. It took place August 16th. Did you get a letter saying that we're going to consider these rules and regulations? I didn't. Nobody did. But they do have a window. You still can make comments until next Monday. So that's the email address, that rules coordinator at dcbs.oregon.gov. So you can still come in with comments on any of this. The rules are to be finalized by October 1st, and they'll be effective by April 1st of next year. The Oregon Home Builders Association said, based just on the changes of this code, nothing else, not counting inflation or anything else, just the rules here would increase the cost of a 1,400 square foot house by $8,200. So, yeah, affordable housing. And another thing says we're more than 40,000 housing units short of meeting the needs of Oregon. Land use. This is my bailiwick. I've done it for over 40 years, no, over 50 years. I started back in the 70s in the city of LA. I thought I'd come up here and just have a great time. But Oregon is different than anybody else. They have a Department of Land Conservation and Development, and they're to identify updates that are needed to the statewide plans and land use programs, local comprehensive plans, and zoning codes to address wildfire hazard. They are required to come up with this report. I think it's in October. And they will outline what are the things that they want the counties to do. So they're going to address issues such as defensible space, building codes, safe evacuation, and development considerations. That's the term that I talked about. Planning codes can deny applications if the criteria are not met. Development considerations can deny buildings on property in extreme and high wildfire areas. So if you got a piece of vacant land, it breaks my heart that I've had to tell people, you've owned a piece of land for 40 years, it's been in that family. You can't build a house on it because of the rules that the state and the counties have adopted. Reasons that they can deny things like this, and these are some of the kind of things that I had to address when I made applications for people. If you had a substandard road, if you had a lack of structure fire company or a fire district, if there was inadequate fire capacity in that fire district. Some of our districts are not really great. I think Wolf Creek has been one that's been kind of hard. If you don't, looking at surrounding vegetation, lack of water storage, box canyons, lack of a secondary access in emergency or steep slopes. So all of these things, you have to prove that what you're doing is appropriate for the density of housing that you're proposing. Like I said, this report is due October 1st. The project to reduce fire risk. Projects are to be designed and implemented to reduce fire fuels and promote landscape resiliency. The plan is on a 20-year cycle. So the projects that they develop now, it'll take 20 years before they complete this one, and they have another round of what goes next. But the thinning that is supposed to reduce these fire fuels, you cannot do this thinning in inventoried roadless areas, riparian reserves, late successional reserves, old growth for spotted owl, wild and scenic river areas, critical habitat for threatened or endangered species, federally designated area of critical environmental concern, or designated wilderness study areas. They don't even have to be adopted. If they're under study, you can't go thin them. So, yes, we're going to do all these programs to help reduce the fire potential out there, but we can't do it here, and here, and here, and here. Power companies, they must develop plans to submit to the Public Utility Commission to include protocols of when they're going to de-energize the facilities to mitigate wildfires, describe how to carry out vegetation management, identify procedures and standards for inspection of infrastructure. All this costs money, and where's it going to come from? It's going to be recovered by consumer rates. So your power bill is going to go up. The Wildfire Program Director is appointed by the governor. He oversees the implementation of this bill, and he monitors and assesses the financial impacts to local jurisdictions. Doesn't say anything about the financial impacts on the citizens of the state. So they're not worried about how much it's going to cost you. All they're going to worry about is what it's going to cost their departments. It says they're to engage the insurance companies on policy coverage provisions. And that's all it says is engage. We're going to talk to them about it. There is nothing in the bill that says they can't raise your rates or cancel you. It just says, well, we'll talk to them. This is from a statement by Senator Dennis Linthicum from Klamath County. He says, ORS 477.060 limits fire cost to property owner not to exceed $25 a lot. This limitation was repealed in this bill, but it left ORS 477.270. It says, so cost for providing protection for privately owned forest land shall be a lien upon such property. So you can lose your property just like you can for not paying property taxes. And this is for the cost to provide fire protection. So the costs are passed on to you, in addition to your normal taxes that you pay. Here's our statements from the Wildfire Council when they did that 110-page report. The accumulation of fuels on fire-prone federal forests is particularly impactful to Oregonians, as 92 to 93% of the burned acres occur on federal lands. So the fires that we have, most of it, almost 93% of it, is covered on federal lands. That's where the impact should be levied, is on the federal properties and not on ours. Oregon is the nation-leading land use systems. They have limited the impact of sprawl within the wild-urban interface to an extent not possible elsewhere. What that is the LCDC telling people that they can't build out in the forest. If you got 20 acres out there, can you split your property? In a lot of cases, no. If you got 10 acres, can you split it for your kids to have a house? No. They're going to make it more and more difficult to divide your property or even build on vacant properties for those areas that they consider as high or extreme danger wildfire, because we don't want people out there to get hurt. But they forget it's not their property, it's yours. The term wild-urban interface, WUI, in Oregon is primarily related to definitions of the Forest Service, or ODF, which don't take into account fire or fuel types other than forest and have limited usefulness. When the WUI was first talked about, which is where houses and forests come together, they talked about when you got to 4 dwelling units per 40 acres, 1 house per 10 acres. In the new definition that they adopted just before they sent the letters out to everybody, they changed that to 1 house and 40 acres. So with that increased density, what did that do? It made the area bigger that they're going to control. It says population trends continue to climb upwards while the percentage of vulnerable people remains fairly flat. So even though Oregon's growing, the real impact to us people that live in the rural area hasn't really changed that much. So current status, there are 11 state agencies that are continuing to move forward with this program. It hasn't stopped with the map. The risk map will be revised and republished. From what I hear, it's going to change less than 10% in all the changes that they're going to make. A new appeals period will be open, but no part of the program addresses insurance costs other than to contact the insurance companies. This law is in place today. The only way the citizens can change it is by initiative petition, gathering signatures, going out, and this could take 2 years to try and get it on the ballot to vote on something. What we need to do is do what we did when the map first came out, is to contact our representatives and senators to stop the bill now before more damage is done. We need to contact the governor. Your action delayed the map, and we need action now to repeal the entire program or put it to a vote. Statements during the adoption of this thing. Senator Golden was so much shocked by the pushback of the bill is beginning to see comments made by Republicans in the committee hearings neglected to consider there will be extensive public input attached to the rulemaking. I've already explained they're making the rules and they're not telling you that it's going on. You're just supposed to automatically know. Fred Gerard said, "This bill I would rate as the worst bill of the session. Every obstacle known to God and man is put before these people so they can't rebuild, and this is going to be another one." He was referring to the people rebuilding after the Beachy Creek fire. He said after 2 years, only 25% of the people have got their permits approved to rebuild. Christine Drazen, I recognize people are telling me that this bill has been years in the making. This was not a public process. It's not. So who do we have to thank? We have to thank our governor. So in the back on the table when you came in, I put out sheets that talk about the governor's contact information, your senator, your representative, and the different departments that are involved in this. We need to contact these people now and have them do something. If we don't rise up now, all of this is just going to keep moving right on down the line, just like a wave, and we're going to get drowned. Jeff Golden, he's the chief sponsor. He's from Ashland. He needs to be contacted. And here's the departments. Like I said, I've got pieces of paper in the back that have all these contacts for the state university, the fire marshal, DLCD,